Welcome. Let's take a look at question 3 from the 2018 February bar exam. A test on torts, real property, and common law. If you want to consider taking as part of real property or common law, that's your call. It's actually in both horn books, but generally torts and real property. So as always, the first thing you want to do whenever doing an essay, an MB question, or a performance test for that matter, is, hey, what are they asking us to do? Let's go to the call to question. So number 1, it says, if Michelle sues Len regarding continued use of the smokehouse, so use of smokehouse, when I see the word smokehouse, the first thing I think of, the first part of the word is smoke. When I think of smoke, I think of odor, I think of smell, I think of all the intangibles that go to a nuisance claim, because if it was tangible, it would be a trespass. If it's intangible, it's going to be a nuisance. So why do I think the examiners are going to open this up with nuisance, which is a substantial and unreasonable interference with real property? We'll get into that in a second. We'll go into the difference between elements and factors, substantial and unreasonable, which are the elements, and the factors that go under unreasonableness. Okay. What claims, if any way, may she reasonably raise? What defenses may he reasonably assert? And what are the outcome? So use of the smokehouse, we have claims, defenses, outcome. So typical 3-part exam, but you're going to already kind of get to the analysis of what the defenses are. I think defenses sometimes will be included within the claims. Like one of the defenses is like coming to the nuisance, etc., etc. Not that it may apply here, but it could be considered a defense or state of the art, or however you want to look at it. Okay, so use of the smokehouse, claims, defenses, and outcome. Number 2, Michelle sues Len. Again, she's suing him for fetching his dog. What claims may she reasonably raise? What defenses may he reasonably assert? What is the likely outcome? It's the same thing. Number 3. Is Michelle likely to prevail in her argument for additional compensation from town? So it's interesting how the call to questions here gives so much away. Number 1, I hear smokehouse and I think to myself, all right, nuisance. Call number 3, additional compensation. Well, I know that why are you getting money from town and why are you seeking additional compensation? I know that you can get money from a city or a state or the government and they pay you just compensation for a taking. So this additional compensation lets me to believe, so we have Michelle versus town, and compensation, the additional compensation, to me, are they getting at takings? And you find out, yes, they are. They're getting at takings. And it's a really small issue. Now, when the exam has more than 2 calls to the question, generally the most important calls will be in the front. This will be the least important call. And here, it follows suit. You'll notice that when going through essays. If you actually go through them carefully, the examiners always front load the essays. They don't back load it because they know you're running out of time at the end. They're not going to put the most important issues there. The most important issues will start in the beginning of the essay, will be brought up in the front. So instead of rushing to finish, which is the mistake that most students do when they do the essays, they just rush through it, they don't read it carefully. Take your time, do the best you can in the first 45 minutes, maybe even 50 minutes, wrap up in less than the last 10. Make sure you learn how to wrap things up and just quickly go through it. Another thing that's the big problem with students, and one of the biggest obstacles that I see with the essays, they don't read them carefully. If you actually slow down and read it carefully, it becomes so much easier. This is interesting. This essay follows suit again to everything the examiner's doing. If you'll notice, there's 3 calls to the question. Also notice there are 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph goes to call 1. The second paragraph goes to call 2. The third paragraph goes to call 3. So if you were to draw a line to all 3 of them, you'll notice how easy this essay becomes. It's just 3 mini essays on 3 separate issues with 3 separate fact patterns, and that's the way you look at it. So it becomes really easy when you start breaking the essay down, and if you think this is the only essay the examiners do it on, you're out of your mind, because they do it very consistently and very regularly. Keep a note of that, you'll see. Okay, let's start off from the top. Len, an excellent chef, I don't know why they're telling us he's an excellent chef. I still haven't figured that one out. It might be just like hyperbole, but the examiners don't usually use descriptive language unless they're getting at something. Installed a smokehouse in his backyard 3 years ago to supply smoked meat to his friends. Len's neighbor Michelle enjoyed the mild climate and spent most of her time outdoors. Fine, she has the right to use and enjoy her property as she sees fit, as long as she doesn't interfere with anyone else's use and enjoyment, which is what Len's allegedly doing. She found the smoke and smells from Len's property very annoying and stopped having parties outdoors after receiving complaints from some of her guests. Why is that important? We'll get into it in a second. She asked Len multiple times to stop using the smokehouse. He rebuffed her request. Okay, because he has the right to use the property as he sees fit. So the only thing that I see here is nuisance. And what is a nuisance? A nuisance is a substantial and unreasonable interference with the use and enjoyment of another person's property. So substantial and unreasonable, believe it or not, are elements, not factors. Okay, there's a difference between elements and factors. Elements are what needs to be proved. In order to prove nuisance, you've got to prove both substantial and unreasonable. Just like in order to prove negligence, you have to prove duty, breach, causation, and damages. So the elements must be proven in order to make the claim. Whereas factors are things the court's going to consider to see if an element is proved. So what is substantial? Substantial means that you're not hypersensitive. So substantial means substantial, a lot. It affects the community as a whole. It affects a lot of people, a substantial number of people in the neighborhood. So a person who's hypersensitive, and this is the way they love to test it on the MBE, is you have somebody who's hypersensitive to the noise or the sound or whatever the case is, and no one else has a problem with it. I think we have that same issue here, because all we have is that she received complaints from some of her guests. I don't see any complaints by any of the neighbors. I don't see anyone else having a problem with Len's Smokehouse, so she might just be hypersensitive to the smokehouse, the smell from his meat. All right? Now, unreasonable, there's a bunch of factors like coming to the nuisance, state of the art, etc., etc. There are a bunch of factors that determine whether or not it's reasonable, whether it can be eliminated or anything like that. So the two elements of substantial and reasonable need to be discussed. Is she hypersensitive? Only some of her guests complain? Do any of the other neighbors have a problem with it? If not, she's not going to meet that element, which cancels out the nuisance claim. But of course, you don't want to stop there. You want to get in the unreasonableness. Did she actually come to the nuisance? I mean, was she living there before he started this, or did she buy a property after? So did she buy a property in the last 3 years? In the next paragraph, we actually find out she's been there for over 10 years because he's been fetching his dog for 10 years, which means she did not come to the nuisance. So the price isn't already factored in. Just something to discuss in terms of that. Anyways, I really don't see any defenses. I guess the defense would be she's hypersensitive and that he has a right to use and enjoy his property as he wishes. And the outcome, there's no way she's going to get a nuisance claim. There's no way she's going to make him stop. Think about this. If you were to prevent every single one of your neighbors from cooking a barbecue outside, come on. There's just no way. I can't see logically how they would, any court would give her a nuisance claim and prevent Len from, stop Len from having a backyard barbecue. It just doesn't make sense. Now, of course, conclusion is really immaterial. The fact of the matter is you talk about both elements of nuisance and discuss what the defenses could be and what the outcome might be. Okay. I don't think she's going to get it. I think his only defense is she's hypersensitive. The other neighbors don't complain. And her only claim I see on these facts is nuisance. Okay, moving on. We're going to go to the second paragraph, which actually goes to column number 2. Len has frequently invaded Michelle's patio to retrieve his dog when it wandered from home. Frequently. So he seems to be doing this a lot, which means she might be able to get an injunction, but they're not asking about remedies. I'm surprised they didn't, because I would say getting an injunction to prevent him from doing it. Michelle put up a no trespassing sign. If you can't see that the issue is trespass, I don't know how much more easy the examiners can make it. Because without a trespassing sign, it's trespass to land. It can't be any more easy than that. So all it is an intentional interference with somebody's property. just walk on someone's property. And the intent to actually do the act that goes on the property. She put up a no trespassing sign and a wire fence between their parcels. After the dog dug a hole into the fence, Len cut some of the wires. Now it's interesting, a lot of people won't catch this. By cutting the wires, he's defaced her property, trespassed a chattel. That one I think was a tough one to catch. I think a lot of people would probably never even see that. And entered Michelle's property anyway. That's where he's trespassing the land, telling her that he'd been fetching his wandering dog from her patio for at least 10 years. Well, there you go. That's how we know she didn't come to the nuisance, because it's been 10 years. So one fact relates to the previous paragraph. And wouldn't stop now. The fact that he won't stop now, that he's frequently invading it, to me it would seem like she'd probably get an injunction, but they're not asking about a remedy. I guess you could maybe categorize that under a claim, and if you just want to be, this is a situation where it's like, do I not? If you're going to do it quickly, say an injunction to prevent him from continuing to go on it, because damages might not suffice because he keeps wandering onto a property. He's been doing those for 10 years, and therefore I discussed that. Another thing is, and this is going to be up for debate, I can't wait till they release the answers to know this, but why are the examiners telling me he's been doing it for 10 years? This is a real property torts essay, as you can find out. He's been doing it for 10 years. What's so significant? Why didn't they say some time? Why didn't they say a few years? Why didn't they say 1 year? Why didn't they say 6 months? Because the examiners are getting at adverse possession. Because he has been entering her property, and the main issue is going to be consent, with or without consent. Is it hostile? I have to imagine the only reason why the examiners put 10 years in there is for you to bring up the issue of adverse possession. So we have trespass to land, trespass to chattel, and by the way, I don't know if you actually know this in California, which is not, you don't need to know California law, but a little neighborly advice. In California law, the statutory period for adverse possession is 5 years. It's only 5 years in California. Mostly, like, well, how does that happen? Generally, you have like a property dispute, or you build like a shed on someone's property, or you put a fence that actually is a couple inches in their property. After 5 years, if you do it without their permission, without consent, then you'll adversely possess it. So the question is, has he been entering the 10 years without consent? I mean, she just put up the no trespassing sign. She didn't have a problem with it before. So I think the best thing is for her argument is, hey, I let him do it and now I'm sick of it. So I want him to stop now. So the clock would begin running right when she put up the no trespassing sign. His argument would be, hey, I never had her consent. It was always hostile. I've been doing it for 10 years. So trespass to land, trespass to chattel. And what are the damages to trespass to land? Here it would be probably nominal. So you'll probably want to get an injunction because the damages are really zero. Trespass to chattel, repair the fence or pay for the new fence. Adverse possession, the issue is going to be consent or hostile. There you go. Moving on to the final paragraph. Last week, the town filed suit to condemn Michelle's land for a public park. So that's when they're exercising their power of eminent domain and it will result in a taking. It tendered to the court as compensation a sum substantially exceeding the prices of comparable parcels recently sold in the neighborhood. Okay, so what is just compensation? Just compensation is what the Supreme Court has called fair market value. And what is the fair market value? What a reasonable person would pay for the property. So that's not really questioned. So Michelle argues that the amount is insufficient because it is substantially less than a sum she turned down for her parcel a few years ago. Okay, I'll stop right there. Well, property values do tend to fluctuate. Now, over a long period of time, they will rise. At least, throughout history, property values have increased because the land is becoming more scarce while people are becoming more prevalent. So that's why property prices tend to go up. So is this fair market value? I mean, they are giving her a sum that substantially exceeded comparable parcels. So we're not comparing apples to oranges. We're comparing apples to apples here. That recently sold, and she's saying, hey, look, a few years ago, I would have got a lot more. But a few years ago, the market might have been higher. We don't know that. But I think the big issue here, and that's just a discussion on what that is. And she also argues it does not include compensation for relocation costs. Well, does anybody know the law on that? I'll tell you. usually get you relocation costs when there's a breach of the landlord-tenant relationship. But do courts award relocation costs for taking? And the answer is, some do, some don't. At the federal level, they actually do. It's actually built in. At the state level, it's up to the state to determine whether or not, because most takings are done at the state level, so it's up to the state to determine whether or not they want to pay relocation costs. It's usually by statute. But the answer is, so here's the thing, there is no answer to this question because you can't have a definitive answer without a statute or without some kind of guidance. The examiners, I believe, and they do this quite often, they do this occasionally, excuse me, they want to see how you're going to handle an issue that you've never studied. I mean, who studied relocation costs and taking? I guarantee one person's up there going, and it'd be cool if you actually responded to this on the YouTube thing, if you covered it in class. Most people that covered relocation costs and takings are usually writing law review articles or specializing in the subject or working at a firm that did it, and they would know something about it. But the average law student, 99% of the people taking the bar exam, would not have an idea about that. And let me tell you something, I actually had to look it up myself. So there you go. It lets you know what the examiners always do one little tiny thing each bar that tests an issue that almost nobody knows, and they just want to see how you're going to handle it. So don't freak out. It's just like, okay, how am I going to handle this? Should they get relocation costs? Use common sense. You know, how would you decide if you were the judge? And there's your answer. Okay, so a quick recap. Number one, the nuisance, substantial and unreasonable for the smokehouse, whether they're hypersensitive. For number two, he fetched his dog, he trespassed on her land. He also cut her fence, so he trespassed a chattel. And because it's been for 10 years, we might have some adverse possession. And here she wants additional compensation. Well, they only have to pay her just compensation, which is fair market value. We don't know what the fair market value is. We know it's comparable to other properties now, but it wasn't from 3 years ago. Why? We don't exactly know that. And for the relocation costs, she may or may not get that. Hey, ball's in your court. Answer it however you like. Okay, that's a wrap for question 3, torts and real property. Hope you enjoyed this. This is Jason Tolerico for One Timers.